I don't have quite the words to express how good it is to have Clark and Sally and Lincoln and Autumn and Savannah with us this morning. They're family to Debbie and me. Many of our most joyful memories still include Clark and Sally. In fact, Clark lived over at the parsonage for 4 or 5 years. He came for a weekend and stayed. They were really special years. Over supper in those years, we managed to hold the world together in our discussions. It was the crash of 2007, but Debbie and Clark and I don't take credit for that. Anyway, they're all here to celebrate Clark and Sally's wedding here 10 years ago. Lincoln was born here, not exactly in this room, but close. I do wish you were getting to hear Chris this morning, though, and I mean that sincerely. As some of you, there's the picture of them. Isn't that great? Some of you know over the past few years, I've given a lot of thought to why it is that many people no longer go to church. And there are many reasons for this, but one is that they come to many churches and they hear only bad news. They hear of a God outraged by their sins. They hear of a story that ends horrifically with vast multitudes of people suffering excruciating pain forever and ever in the fires of hell. And if that sort of intrigues you and piques your interest, on a Wednesday evening in November, we will be talking about that at some length. But anyway, for a lot of churches, the story ends badly in the fires of hell, and so much the worse if you've ever had an abortion or if their sexual orientation doesn't line up with the powers that be. And so they leave church feeling depressed, guilty, and shamed. Their spirits are battered, they don't come back, they're afraid of being hurt further. What they're looking for, of course, is good news, a sense of forgiveness, meaning, purpose, and direction in life, a mission, a way to cope with strain, with change and with stress, a way to get unstuck from all the ways that life can trap us. What they are looking for, it turns out, is what Jesus came and what Jesus comes offering, and that is joy, that deep smile in the soul that tells us all is well and all shall be well, whatever we face, so that our mouths might be filled with laughter, right? Consider now this morning's text. It's Psalm 126. It's one of the songs of ascent. It's a song that pilgrims would sing on their way up to Jerusalem. And in this psalm, Psalm 126, the psalmist is looking back to the best time of his life, to a decade in the late 6th century BC, it was the 530s, when the Persian king Cyrus, against all odds, conquered Babylon and set the Jewish exiles there free. Now he remembers the agony of exile, the years of homesickness, how families had been separated, how his grandparents had died in a strange land, far from the land they loved, and how his children had grown up never having seen the city of David. And then it was all over. Then it was all over, and he breaks forth in song. The Lord has brought back the captives to Zion. We were like men who dreamed. Our mouths were filled with laughter, our tongues with songs of joy. Now note, he is not unaware of the trouble. He's not unaware of the hard times. Jerusalem at first is little more than toppled walls and a heap of burned out ruins. So the song continues, restore our fortunes, O Lord. So few had returned. It was like post-pandemic. Their numbers were small. Most Jews had stayed in Babylon comfortably. They had got used to new rhythms. They'd done well there. They'd prospered, and many of them had no enthusiasm for roughing it in Zion. And so here there are, this small group of returnees, beleaguered and surrounded by people who do not wish them well. The psalmist has a choice. He could simply have been demoralized and given way to depression, but he doesn't. He looks to the future and he sings now in verses 5 through 6, those who sow in tears will reap with songs of joy. He who goes out weeping, carrying seeds to sow, will return with songs of joy, carrying sheaves with him. So he looks to the past and he remembers the joy. Our mouths were filled with laughter. He looks to the future and he expects only the best. Those who sow in tears will reap with songs of joy. So what does he decide to do in the present? In verse 3, the Lord has done great things for us, and we are filled with joy. Joy in the past, joy in the present, joy in the future, joy in the present. Joy is the way we're meant to be. In fact, we are wired for joy. Our bodies crave it. They thrive on it. Much of life is a quest for the joy we are meant to have. But too often we look for it in all the wrong places, in the buzz of a cocktail hour, in the momentary pleasure of feeling smarter or feeling better than others maybe, in humor at the expense of others, in the briefest of celebrations after a game, in the expensive thrills of exotic places, in having what it is not ours to have, in taking what it is not ours to take. As C.S. Lewis noted in a sermon of his, The Weight of Glory, and this is an interesting quote, we are half-hearted creatures fooling about with drink and sex and ambition when infinite joy is offered us, like an ignorant child who wants to go on making mud pies in a slum because he cannot imagine what is meant by the offer of a holiday at the sea. We are too easily pleased when infinite joy is offered us. There are joy stealers all around us. I will mention 3 this morning, but truthfully, there are joy stealers all around us. Stop and look and see. Find yours. Think about it. Find yours. Block them. Here's 3 for the morning. Number 1, sin and shame. Across the centuries, this is joy stealer number 1. In fact, this is one of the big problems with sin and shame. It's not that our God, who is in fact love, despises us in our sin and shame. You will often hear that in churches. That is not true. It's that sin and shame are joy stealers. And they rob us of our vitality. They rob us of our life force. At their best, they work for a while and then they steal our joy, right? Then they rob us of our life force. They rob us of our vitality, and we all know this. The second joy stealer, it pertains particularly to the age in which we live now, is the news. The news, the stuff you see on TV, or that you read on social media, or the posts that you read on social media. It's bad news. Guess what? It's always bad news. It's always bad news because it's news. I want you to think about it. It's always bad because it's news. Now, what does that mean? It's what's unusual. We have a word for it. It's called newsworthy. It's what catches your attention because it's not the way that life usually works. It breaks us from our everyday world of faith and family and friends. It's news, it's bad, it's always bad. It's meant to arouse an alarm and get your attention. Well, it's meant to sell advertising. And that means it's meant to arouse an alarm and get your attention. And often, some newscasters, it's just manufactured outrage. They go to bed at night smiling, but you don't. It's manufactured outrage. And if you're watching news alone in the middle of the day with no one around you to give you a reality check, it steals your joy. And if you're watching news in the evening, say just before you go to bed, the odds that you will fall asleep happy are kind of against you. What's worse, you'll wake up with a news hangover. The news is a joy stealer. The third joy stealer is the quest for certainty. Now let's unpack that a bit. Somehow Christians sometimes get the notion that we have to be absolutely certain about what we believe in everything. Now add to that how many people have to be the smartest person in the room or the smartest person on social media, and you have a toxic mix. You have people who can't even talk to one another anymore. That's what certainty does for us. And the irony is that the way to certainty is to know just a little bit about something. If you learn a lot, you're not quite so sure. Isn't that the way truth actually works? If you know a lot, you're not quite so sure. But you're kinder, you're more humble, you're more thoughtful, and you're more reasonable. And now you can talk to others, and you can be heard by others. In our quest for certainty, we destroy faith, we destroy friendships, we may even destroy churches or workplaces or neighborhoods or families. What if certainty turns out to be a sin? That's the question the remarkable Peter Enns takes up in his fascinating little book, The Sin of Certainty, Why God Desires Our Trust More Than Our Correct Beliefs. Certainty isn't the truth. Certainty is a substitute for truth. You learn almost nothing when you're certain of something. There are lots of things you should know. There are a lot of things that I feel quite confident of. There are a few things I'm certain of. And certainty, this need for certainty, this quest for certainty, is a joy stealer. The mystery is gone. The awe and wonder in life is gone. Humility is gone, and trust is gone. We are called to trust God and the life that God is giving us, to keep trusting God whatever happens, to keep trusting God when there are questions you honestly can't answer, and when there are mysteries you can't figure out, and when some of the finest people you know don't see it your way. Maybe they're right. Listen, therein in trusting lies freedom. What liberation there is in letting go and trusting whatever is happening. The need to be certain is a joy stealer. Now here's the bottom line. Joy is bedrock stuff. It's confidence that regardless of mood or circumstance, a sense of somehow all is well, regardless of how we feel or what we are going through. Just as the psalmist in Psalm 126 sings. The people singing this song were no strangers to the dark side of life. Most of us have never seen the darkness that they lived through. In fact, that's actually true of most of us in our time and place. There's been so much darkness in history and in many, many other countries, and we have never seen the darkness many, many other people have gone through. But these people back then, they carried in their bones the painful memory of exile, and on their backs the scars of depression. They had been to the wilderness, and they knew nights of weeping, and they still lived among the ruins, and they knew what it meant to sow in tears. Yet they chose joy anyway. It's what Holocaust survivor, Auschwitz survivor, Edith Eva Eger concludes in her bestseller, The Choice. She reflects back on her time in Auschwitz and the many, many years it took for her to process that and recover from it. And this was the conclusion she came to, which is you always have a choice. You don't have control over a lot of things that may happen to you, but you always have choice on how you will respond to what happens to you. You can choose to live. You can choose to help others. And you can choose joy. Do you remember what Paul and Silas were doing in Philippi that one night after they'd been stripped and beaten, severely flogged, thrown into prison with their feet in stocks, fastened in stocks? Around midnight, they were singing hymns to God. Do you remember what happened then? Check it out. It's in Acts chapter 16. My question this morning is, what is it that Paul and Silas in prison at midnight, what is it that had them singing? Where did they find the joy? It all comes down to seeing the world as Paul and Silas saw it. A world lit by resurrection and open to the Spirit of God. An enchanted and enchanting world surrounded by grace, filled already with eternity. Their own lives now filled to the measure of all the fullness of God, deeply aware of how wide and long and high and deep is the love of Christ. The divine flow all around them and in them, even when persecuted, even in jail around midnight. Now I'm reminded of what Jesus was saying in the Beatitudes in Matthew chapter 5 when he spoke of the poor in spirit and of others as blessed. And you think about, what does he mean by blessed? Do you remember what he was saying really? What he means by blessed is how joyful, how radiantly joyful, how radiantly, unshakably joyful such people are. No one will be able to take away their joy, he says in another place in John chapter 16, how blissful such people are. In their very poverty of spirit, in their humility, in their not being proud, in their inner imaginations, that first beatitude, in their very poverty of spirit, it is they who have found unshakable joy. In their grieving, in their unanticipated meekness, in their passion for just doing what is right, regardless of the consequences to themselves, in their mercy, in their single-minded pursuit of God, they have found unshakable joy. In their single-minded pursuit of God, in their renouncing violence, and in their making peace, in all circumstances, even persecution, it is they who have found unshakable joy. It is they who sense eternity all around them. It is they who live enchanted lives. All nature sings, and round them rings the music of the spheres, a hymn tells us. Not needing to possess or control anything, all things are theirs. That's the way that works. They're open to all that life offers them, trusting that no matter what happens in their lives, it may be for their highest good. Deep in their souls, it is they who are born again. It is they who are free. God's love pours into them, joy and vitality pours out of them. It is they who feel one with God, who sense the divine flow all around them and within them. They are surrounded by grace. For them, time becomes eternity. They are filled with previously unimaginable power. They feel that they can touch the heavens. That kingdom of heaven, is theirs. They have found a joy that is nothing short of euphoria. And even when they slip, and they will sometimes slip, but now they know life in the Spirit and the way back to it. Maybe you're struggling this morning. So at first you try a little poverty of spirit, a little purity of heart. You let go of your narrow, fearful little ego. Maybe you're hurt, maybe deeply disappointed. You may have hit what seems close to bottom, and for a moment you just let go and trust. You're doing the right thing. And it is just then that you sense this deeper life, how free you could be, how good life could be. And it's almost something like euphoria, a state you've never quite felt before. In that moment, you realize that there is out there, just beyond doubt and fear and grief, there is unshakable joy. But the moment leaves you. At first, such moments do. They come and they go. But now just maybe you can see the bliss, the deep soul happiness that the God who is love intends for you. And it is this that we offer to everyone we know, whoever they are and whatever they have done, however wrong they may feel themselves to be, a way back to God and a way back to joy. And so we come to the call of this morning. To this you are called. Away from the strange, haunting sadness that afflicts so many. Away from the anguish that has entered the modern soul. Back to enchanted time and space. A world surrounded by grace and eternity, the divine flow all around us and within us, our own lives emptied of self and now filled to the measure of all the fullness of God. Back to the psalmist composing and singing Psalm 126. Back to the life you've always wanted, life lived vibrantly and expectantly, increasingly fearlessly. Back to the sheer joy of being alive and alive forever.